Hello, everybody, and welcome to the webinar with Higher Quotient. Today, we have Dr. Mary Shea with us, and we'll be discussing boosting women in high-tech sales job roles. More broadly, what we're trying to capture from her is how overall leaders are thinking about diversity, inclusion, and building diverse teams, specifically, which is very, very important in the revenue teams. Um, so overall about Dr. Mary Shea, we are very, very excited to have this conversation with her because she not only comes from a great background from a CRO, principal analyst at Forrester, and currently the VP, Global Innovation Evangelist at Outreach, but also she comes from a very rich sales experience background. And personally, we are very keen to have this chat and hear your views and your vision for what the future of sales look like. Uh, Very excited to also hear how leaders like you, and you work with so many different organizations through outreach, are thinking of enabling the sales teams through different tools, helping them to amplify their productivities. And she also runs a podcast, award-winning podcast, where she discusses and identifies new and disruptive ways that people are building new revenue opportunities in this economic downturn. It's always, we hear all sorts of things that sales cycles are longer, decision making is much longer, all the bad news is, but there are a lot of innovation that is happening. So how is she trying to find out those innovative minds and trying to share that with the global ecosystem? So we would love to hear your thoughts on that as well. And thank you so much for taking out the time and for joining us for this webinar.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here, Smarth, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone. And I can't wait to dive into the topics. There's so much to discuss. And you're right, it's a difficult time economically, but within these times, we find massive disruption, technology and otherwise. And so the level of innovation that's happening is just off the charts. And so I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
And you've mentioned it right, that there's a lot of disruption happening, and this is the right time because in recession, most of the disruptive ideas have come up. You talk about most of the startups that that are well recognized today. So, and sales overall has been very dynamic. So, how in your opinion has sales transformed from what it was 20 years back to what it is today, and how are some of the leaders keeping pace with it?
Such a great question. I mean, there's been massive transformation. And I think that Satya Nadella said in the midst of the COVID pandemic that we had digitally transformed more in 2 months than 5 years. And that's really true. I think the way we go to market and the way we sell today is fundamentally different than how we did it 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and even 20 years ago. And yet, there's some things from old school that you never want to lose, right? The empathy, the ability to listen, the ability to be an advocate for your client, and just strong networking skills. Those are skills that I think, you never lose. But what we're seeing now is that sellers really need to take a digital first approach to going to market. And that doesn't mean they're not going to meet with customers and prospects in person, but they may do the first 80% or 90% of those meetings virtually or remotely. So that means you have to have really good skills in terms of being able to connect authentically in synchronous and asynchronous video. You need to be able to use social media platforms to build community and share ideas and do digital good deeds on a daily basis. And you need to be able to understand how to quickly interpret data and understand what your next action is going to be. So it's a little bit of a different world. And some of the skill set of sellers is really different. So digital first, data driven. Another thing they need that's really different from the past, Smart, is they need to be collaborative. What we're seeing is large buying groups on the buy side, and then you need to match those on the sell side. So sellers need to be that collaborator that's going to bring all the right people to the conversation at the right moment.
I love these insights, and specifically how through your groundbreaking research you enable the 600 people strong team at Outreach. If you could share some perspective on what trends are you seeing through your
Yeah.
research, what has changed in the last 6 months now that we're in this situation?
Yeah, that's such a great question because I'm always doing quantitative research, which means I'm going out and surveying sales leaders, salespeople, and also business leaders. And I just surveyed 500 plus business leaders globally to understand how they were adapting to the global economic downturn and how that was going to impact their planning, their strategic planning and their growth planning for next year, 2023. What we're seeing is that most companies have actually lowered their targets for this year. So they've already accepted that the overall revenue is going to be a little bit lower. But what the market's telling us, not just at Outreach, but everywhere, Smarth, now, you know this because you're an entrepreneur, is we're moving from a growth at all cost environment to measured, profitable, predictable, efficient revenue. And that's one of the things that Outreach helps with. We have a sales execution platform that helps every member of the revenue team from CRO down to customer success or post-sale personnel deliver efficient, predictable revenue. So that's the biggest change is, we're seeing targets being reduced, but more focused on margin growth. We're seeing smaller, more agile sales organizations, but we're seeing those sellers be more productive. So you're seeing productivity across a broader range of sellers. And you're seeing technology have a critical role in the ability to execute your go-to-market strategy. Whereas, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, you just thought, well, if I have Salesforce or Dynamics, that's all I need, right? And so I'm not saying you don't need CRM and HubSpot or whatever it is you use, but there are other innovative technology platforms that drive massive efficiencies, help you engage more effectively with personalization and knowledge of where the buyer is in that journey, and that allow you to do it in a scalable and predictable manner. And so those are some of the big changes I'm seeing.
Do you think as over time, the sales and different technologies, people behavior in buying has evolved? How have you upskilled yourself? Are there a few hacks that have helped you to adapt to the current selling procedure?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned my background, and I was at Forrester as a principal analyst for 7 years. And so I had such a wonderful opportunity of speaking to people like yourself day in and day out, right? People who are launching new companies, coming up with new business models, launching new technologies, making AI and automation deliver better and more impactful business outcomes. And so I would have hundreds of calls with CEOs and founders like you at Forrester. And so that was one way that I could stay so far ahead of the market, because people like you are the true innovators. You're 2, 3, 4 years ahead of more traditional and lagging markets. So I still do that in my role at Outreach. So I'm constantly taking meetings with new companies. Maybe they're not an Outreach customer or they're not going to be a customer. And I talk to people. So I would encourage the folks who are listening today, keep your ears to the ground. Talk to everybody. Go to events like SaaStr. That's where we met, right? Go to events like Forrester's B2B marketing and sales event. Come to Outreach Unleash or our Women in Sales event and talk to everybody and learn as much as you can that way. That's super fast. Another thing you can do is my colleague, Matthew Flug, we're very close partners. Well, I'm a boomer and he's a millennial, and we cross pollinate each other with new ways of thinking and new skills. So he helps me with certain things and I help him with other things. So think about mentorship. Can you partner up with someone who has maybe more traditional selling skills? They know how to read the room. They know how to close a deal. They know how to sort of suss out when someone's bullshitting them or whatever, and partner up with them with someone else who can help you learn how to use the technology to engage in like really customized and exciting fashion. So those are a couple of different hacks that I have. What do you do?
No, I think it's always listening to the customers. One, what you said, keep your ears to the ground. That's one. Second, what we've also done at Higher Quotient after obviously a certain stage, what has worked really well for us is building a sandbox where people are just trying moonshots every single day, because what works, what doesn't work, what might work. So from that standpoint, bringing people who have very high risk appetite who are very comfortable with uncertainty and who are very comfortable pulling off moonshots every single day, facing that failure and showing up tomorrow again. So through that, we've also been able to find our ways of growing very fast in the last 2 months. So that's just after we stabilized our core business. Once the product was stabilized, we had done 0 to 1 there. We were selling to enterprises. The feedback was positive, and then you were thinking, hey, how do we sell faster? How do we grow faster? So that's one thing that has really worked. Second, I think it's always, as you said, talking to people. So in the last 1 month or so, and that's how we also met, as you rightly mentioned, engaging with the leaders out there to bounce off few very different ideas to say that, hey, do you see potential in this idea? And it could be very far from your business. So while we have a business, we are building moat, but also it's to say that how do we build value on the side? So that has been another interesting avenue for us to keep experimenting, exploring, etc., etc.
I really like that a lot, especially the culture of the moonshots. And I think about Google and the innovation that they created back in the day. But you do have quite an interesting culture at a higher quotient, and you've been able to accomplish so much in a very relatively short period of time. So the cultural dynamics of innovation, and even allowing people to fail, right? Because I don't think we talk about failure enough. I know from the work that I do with venture capitalists that they oftentimes like to invest in an entrepreneur who's actually had a failed business. They have to understand why the business failed. But if they truly deeply understand why the business failed, then those investors know that mistake's never going to happen again. So having a culture where it's okay to, make a mistake and take a step back drives exponential innovation. And I think you're doing a wonderful job at that.
No, 100%. And in fact, the first startup that I did, which was called VCoach Academy, so that was EdTech, where
Yeah.
at the core, what we were trying to do is help interviewees become better at interviewing and cracking different job opportunities. So it's after that failure happened, and we worked a lot for that 1.5 year, we realized that maybe the business has to be built on the B2B side. So I think that
Yeah.
failure led to the learning that how do we plan the GTM for higher quotient, and that's how the journey also started. And these small failures we encounter every single day, and world is moving very, very fast. For example, 3 months back we were leveraging LinkedIn to generate leads. Before that it was call, emails, and most of the people who are in sales outbound would understand that calls don't do the magic they used to do earlier. So how do you
Right.
keep innovating? Because every single day LinkedIn is changing its algorithm. Every single day the call plus email impact is also getting impact changed. So a lot of things are happening.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. The other thing I think that I like to do is because I love research, is I'm constantly putting research out there on social platforms and engaging in that conversation and drawing people into the conversation. And I think that's a really interesting way of not only brand building, but understanding who's going to be receptive to your ideas if you want to prospect them.
Exactly. And one of these research that you talk about, and I've seen that in some of your posts, you talk a lot about women in sales. And
Yes.
as an industry, obviously, we all know that sales is very male dominated. And somewhere there's also a research that I read, I think it came from you, to say that women are better in sales and revenue generation. So
Yeah.
if you could talk a bit more about how could organizations take few steps in the direction to build a more diverse team, promote women in sales.
Yeah, that's a real passion of mine, as you know. So thank you for letting me have the platform to talk about it. But traditionally, the sales organization has been very homogeneous. Over here in the States, very white male dominated, people in their 30s. And I think everyone has a stereotypical vision of what that looks like. But recently, a lot of research has been done, whether it's from out of HBR or LinkedIn or Forrester or even my own research that shows that women tend to perform better than their male counterparts at delivering revenue. So both at the IC, individual contributor level, manager, and sales leader level, female sales leaders deliver about 12% more than their male counterparts in terms of ability to hit quota. But we find more broadly that diverse organizations just deliver business results. And there's lots of data that now shows that. So I think even though we all know it's the right thing to do, now business leaders are very focused on bringing more women into the sales organization. And unfortunately, we've seen a little bit of a decline post-COVID, where we lost probably just under 10% of women in the workforce, or a little bit more than that. And so we're seeing a decline of women in B2B sales. And now as we see some of the layoffs and the rifts that are happening over here in the States, I'm just encouraging organizations to be very mindful on looking at underrepresented folks and making sure that there is a diverse selling organization. So the research that I did showed that 74% of business buyers wanted to buy from an organization that look like the world around them. No big surprise, smart, and we're also seeing that 76% of business buyers said, if I don't feel that the company that I'm going to partner with has values that match my company and my own, I'm not going to work with that company. I'm going to go to a different provider. And so in the past, at least here over in North America, you saw that mantle being taken up by the B2C brands. So Ben and Jerry's ice cream, Coach, Nike, some of the brands that we all know very well. And now in the business world, we're seeing that CEOs can't remain sort of apolitical, that not only their sales force or their workforce made up of Gen Z and millennials are telling them, we want to know what we stand for, but their buyers are saying the same thing. And we're going to see on RFPs and a range of different things that companies that have diverse representation are going to achieve more sales.
Yeah, and that is so true. I think the 2 points that you mentioned, that the talent attraction,
Right.
everybody now is not just looking for the compensation, is not looking for career growth. They're looking for something deeper, purpose and values. So that same is, and that's very interesting, because earlier, I think a decade back, 5 years back, most of the buyers would just look for, hey, what is the value,
Right.
transactional value that we can drive from this product. Today, it is much more that, hey, do we align at vision level? Do we align at purpose level, value level? So
Yes.
you're very right, and we are also very recently seeing this. Obviously, it's much more deeper in the talent because of great
Yeah.
reshuffle and all of those things. But that trend is definitely coming in the buying behavior as well.
Well, what I'm seeing on the buy side is that we're definitely seeing a lot of consolidation for obvious reasons, but um, business leaders want to have less technology providers, but they want to have a core set of providers that they can really derive deep and expansive value from, versus having 12 different types of tools or point solutions. Smart. So yes, companies are starting to look more deeply at, what do you stand for? What is your product roadmap? What is your vision? What kind of philanthropy do you do, and how do you give back to society writ large? But I want to go back to talent, because I think we were talking about how have things changed, and maybe 5 or 10 years ago, you thought, well, salespeople want a flexible schedule. They want to travel and get a break away from home life, right? And they want to make a lot of money. Well, my research shows that sellers are motivated by many other things than that. They want to work for a company where there's transparency. I understand what your hiring practices are. I understand that there's no bias. I want to understand how I'm going to get paid, promoted, how my territories are going to get set, and what are you going to do for my career, and what are you going to do back for society? And so it's a little bit of a different dynamic.
No, I absolutely agree on the transparency part. And this is also coming from, I had a conversation with Ryan, the CEO of LinkedIn, 2 weeks
Oh,
back. And then we were
amazing.
discussing that how skill as a currency is bringing that transparency. And that's the reason that LinkedIn is also focusing a lot on skills, not just at the entry level, to say that, hey, how do we take away the degrees and move to a more skill-based hiring, because that is transparent, that is bias-free, and that lets you build the right talent who can perform within the organization. But the second part is also that within, once somebody has joined the organization, they want to understand, hey, what are my gaps? Where am I good at? Where am I not good at? The company should invest in the gaps, and all that process has to be very, very transparent, so that it's binary for the candidate or for the employee and the employer.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I completely agree. So, we have the ability to provide that kind of transparency now with technology and data analytics. So we can lean into the science and provide the transparency that folks are looking for. I think the one other thing I didn't mention, which is a little outside of our scope, but talent also wants management and leadership to invest in their physical and mental health well-being, and that's something really, really new. So, you're seeing, like, at Outreach, we have virtual yoga, we have executive coaches who come in and work with us. We have ways to think about how can we put our mind to work to be sort of another growth hack. And so I think companies that also understand how to holistically support their employee smart are the ones that are going to win, today and in the future, because top tier sales talent is hard to get. It's, once you get that talent, you really want to keep them. And salespeople are expensive, and they're also competitive differentiators. So being able to attract, hire, and retain the best sales talent is a huge differentiator for any type of organization that's out there.
No, 100%. And very recently, we were also doing few chats with the business leaders and the CEOs. And one thing that we discovered was that how most of the organizations think of people delivering at work, uh, it's usually a function of their capability and the temperament that they carry to work. Most of the organization would just focus on the former and ignore the latter. And latter is where the magic can happen. If you can really support somebody with psychological support as and when they need, you create the right atmosphere so that they feel positive at work. It's not always just pushing aggression in sales, it's also positive motivation at times, making them feeling that they're capable of doing it. So that part, if done well, can really create the magic.
Agree. Totally agree.
And we also have our first question from Georgina. Um, how important would it? How important is it to be aggressive in sales? Success in sales is equal to what percentage planning plus what percentage aggression and attitude? Very mathematical.
Wow. Yeah. So that's a loaded question. So I think when I think about aggression, I think that sort of dials into some of the stereotypical ways I would think of male-based sellers. And so when I work with different types of organizations and some of our customers, I coach them to actually look at their job descriptions. I would not ever use that word aggressive. I would do, you know, top tier, top notch prospecting skills, the ability to listen effectively and link your solution to the buyer's challenges, the ability to move an opportunity forward in a way that matches the buying motion of your customers, and so on and so forth. And I think certainly the planning and the researching is important, because everyone now expects you not to just know what industry you're in, Smart, or what the broad industry trends are in the talent tech, HR tech, but to really understand them as a persona, what they're challenged with at work on a daily basis, what were the last podcasts they were on, what events they've gone to recently, what their last post was, where they are in the buying journey, what they did in the dark funnel on your website before they actually came to the conversation. So I think aggression is probably less relevant in today's selling environment.
Well, that's great answer. And we have another question that says, do you think during the current recession, startups should aggressively raise and grow, or should they just try to survive through the phase very conservative?
Well, I mean, I think survival is just a prescription for disaster in sales, right? I mean, you have to go all in. And the people who go into sales, I think you kind of described them at the outset of this conversation. We like a little bit of risk in our life. We like a little bit of excitement. Maybe we're the types of people that like to go bungee jumping or skydiving. So I think you have to go all in. And what I love about some of the conversations that I've had is that even though it's a tough environment for talent right now, you're coming up with 4, 5, 6 different types of growth hacks that are enabling you to shorten sales cycles, and still close business, even though it's a difficult environment. So I think if you're not moving forward, you're moving behind in sales. Use this as an opportunity to innovate and find new ways to effectively advance and close business.
And in your experience, before we move to the next question, in your experience, um, what have been some of the catalysts that have helped organizations to build very high performance sales team?
Yeah, I mean, I think as we know, the culture gets set at the top, right? So I always start at the board, and I kind of look at what does the board look like, and is there diversity represented at the board and at the executive team level, and separate from that, then you have to have, is there a performance culture? Is there a culture of winning, not at all costs, Mars, but winning the right way, and through ethical selling practices and everything else in terms of how you run your business? But look, I mean, you've got to enjoy a little bit of a competitive drive. So high performing sales organizations are going to be healthy, competitive. You're going to have role plays, you're going to have pitch competitions, you're going to have growth hacks, you're going to have product hacks, you're going to do all kinds of different things to come up with ways to win, regardless of what the marketplace looks like.
Very interesting. And we have another question. Is there a particular GTM playbook that startups can follow, or is it totally about figuring your own strategy? I think that's a very loaded question again.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on it probably don't have enough information to fully give that answer what it deserves, Smarts, but it depends on what kind of business you're in. Certainly if you're in SaaS, there are 100 playbooks you can read, right? And if you're in sales, there's 100 selling books you can read, like Predictable Revenue was one that was very influential in my early career. And then Justin Michael and Julian Nijinsky wrote another book that looks at selling in a highly technological type of environment. So, I mean, the resources are out there. You kind of need to kind of find out what's the right type of resources and playbook for your niche, and then apply those. But, it's never a one size fits all. You have to kind of adapt and customize based on your client base, your customer base, your target market, and your organization and your goals. Like, is your goal to be a lifestyle company? Is your goal to be profitable? Is your goal to go to the public markets or get acquired? It also depends on what your end game strategy is as well.
So coming to a very interesting question, and we've talked about some part of this, women in sales, but what we're also seeing, and I was interacting with a psychologist very recently, where the broad theme that I tried understanding what motivates people, and what I heard as a very established research that has been done is for male employees, salary, title, and then value addition at work. And for women, it is value addition, title, and then salary. So the
Interesting.
motivations, they're very, very different. But how do you look at the leadership at the top within sales, differing between both the genders?
Yes, that's such an interesting question. And I think, when I was coming up in the world, you found that a lot of female business leaders or sales leaders felt that they needed to take on the attitude, dynamics, body language of their male counterparts in order to be, successful. It was kind of binary, right? You've got to be aggressive, competitive. But then there's something, since you mentioned psychology, which is called the double bind challenge. And that's where if you exhibit those behaviors, people would say, wow, he's really a go-getter, and, he's really driven. He's going to take this company, public, or it's going to, something great. But if I exhibited those behaviors as a woman, people might say, well, she's a little bit difficult to work with, a little bit tough, or, you could take it from there. Right. So women got into kind of a challenge when they didn't lead with their authentic leadership. I was speaking with a woman as part of some research I did for an academic journal just 2 years ago. And she oversaw, she was in an IT services role as sales leadership, very male dominated type of industry, as you know. And she was based in Asia and ran the business there. And her CEO came to her and said, I think your leadership style is too soft and you're not, tough enough. And she tried to change and she realized that that just wasn't her. And so it's really about understanding yourself, having that emotional intelligence of what your strong characteristics are and your blind spots, and leading with those, and then educating others in your sphere about your leadership style, because it just doesn't seem to work. If I were to try to model you and be a leader, and that's just not who I am, right? So I think we're seeing a world now where we do have much more authentic leadership that has a broader range of emotions and techniques, and I'm happy to say that.
It's great to hear. And so, two very tough questions coming your way. If you had to choose between Forrester and outreach, what would you choose?
Oh my God, that's such a difficult question. It's so funny because when I was at Forrester and I was a principal analyst, I was like, this is literally the best job in the world. And I absolutely loved it. I went all over the world and I did speeches and I talked to entrepreneurs like yourself. I'm constantly learning and I work with incredibly intelligent people in a collaborative way. But now I'm doing that on the industry side as well. And so I'm lucky that Manny Medina, who is our CEO and founder, and I'd love to introduce you to him as well when you're in the States, if that is possible, has provided a wonderful platform. So I'm able to do quantitative and qualitative research. I'm able to write. I'm able to share my ideas and tell the market as well as our customers and prospects what they need to be prepared for, what's coming down the path, what they need to look out for, and how they need to be successful. And then simultaneously, I also do a lot of sales support, which I did both at Forrester and Outreach. And so, having been a former SDR, a former CRO, and everything in between, I love selling. So I'm gonna say it's kind of a tie, but you always love your current boss best. So I'm gonna say Outreach. I wasn't born yesterday, Smarth.
The other one, which role do you like more? Innovation evangelist, innovation leader, or CRO? One is very
Innovation.
hands-on,
Yeah.
always under pressure. The other one is more thinking, hey, what next?
I am a futurist, and I think you know that. I'm like constantly looking about what's next. And the way you do that is you don't necessarily have a crystal ball here, but you look at all of the signs that are happening today and you connect all of the data dots, right? And then you talk to people, smartest people in the world. So I love that. Um, I did love being a CRO as well. And what I like about that is, you're pretty much the most important executive in the business. You're probably the highest paid executive in the business. And you can build a team, a wonderful team, and activate those. And so I love coaching and mentoring and stepping back and seeing the people that I brought into the business really, really thrive. And to me, that's super rewarding. So they're two very different roles, but you get rewarded in different ways.
And how has your experience as a CRO influenced how you think of future? Again, 0 to 1 in many different ways, always thinking what next.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think my experience as a CRO is that this is the third recession I've been through. And I went through the first two as first was a sales leader and secondly as general manager and CRO. And so not only do I have the ability to do research, connect the dots, put the theoretical things together, but I have my own personal experience of having done the role and knowing what worked dramatically and what dramatically didn't work. And so, as you predict and look to the future, you can never look away from the past. And so I do draw on my experiences as an operator a lot. I think the other thing that my experience as an operator gives me is much more credibility with the market. And when I have consulting conversations or, I'm with the press or I go on TV or whatever, people know, like, I've been there, done that. So, it's not that I'm just talking about it because I can't do it. I'm talking about it to bring the rich expertise I have with the vision I have for the future. And so the credibility factor is very high.
Yeah, yeah. And moving gears, in one of your podcasts, you talk about how sales is very, very difficult for academia to research on. So would love to understand what made you say that, maybe a deeper thought process. And is there a way that academia, obviously, because you talk a lot more about research as well. So if
Yeah.
academia research can enable sales leaders, organizations to deliver better?
I think what we're starting to see with sales and academia is that academia is catching on, that sales is a great career. I think in the past there was sort of, some different stereotypes. Is this worthy of getting an academic degree on? And now as the role of selling has changed, you have to understand data, you have to understand technology, you have to understand how businesses are organized and run, you have to understand channels, routes to market, all this other kind of stuff. So as the role is becoming a little bit more sophisticated, we're seeing colleges across the US. Now we have probably 100 plus colleges that have sales programs. It can be difficult because it's not a theoretical thing. So one of the things that is working, and when I taught at the University of Chicago's Business School, I used a simulation that was created out of Stanford that allowed sellers to go through the typical activities that sellers did. And, you would see the choices. It was all chance based. They would make choices, and some of them were the right choices, and they made the wrong choices. They got kind of punished. And the ones who made good choices ended up getting promoted. Then once they got promoted to manager, then they were dealing with forecasting for 7 people instead of 1, and it got all really complicated. So using simulations and other things like that can be really helpful to give people that hands-on experience. And Dr. Stephanie Boyer out of Bryant College is someone that I would, encourage your listeners to follow. She's so innovative. She's also an entrepreneur, and she developed a bot-based role play system so that sellers in her programs and others could actually go through 1,000 role plays. And then when they go to get hired for a job, people can actually know that where their weaknesses are based on skills-based assessments, which is, very similar to what you do, but in a kind of a different setting.
Very interesting. And I do, and in fact, I think we were reading some research on role plays and its importance for sales leader. And this was in the context that how today people want to build diverse teams, sales leaders, and specifically in the US. And obviously, cost of talent is very high in sales, and then there are all sorts of problems. But there's an atypical pool, which is 70 million Americans not having the 4-year degrees, but they're very apt to do the SDR job, BDR job. So from that perspective, how do you leverage some of these role plays, not just to see who could be hired, but also to
Yeah.
train them on the job and ensuring that they ramp up much faster?
Well, this is a multi-tiered question, so a very deep question. And I'm going to, step back for a moment. And I think the selling profession, particularly in B2B sales, is a great equalizer. When I think about social equity, which is something that's really important to me, people of all kinds of backgrounds can be successful. I grew up with parents who were in the Depression in the United States. My dad stood in bread lines to get food for his family when they didn't have food when his father lost his job. My parents were their first in their families to go to college and get college degrees. They got master's degrees. And of course, there was some, there were some things that were easier for us just because of, the color of our skin, so to speak, in the US. But sales is one of those great equalizers where anybody can be CEO of their own business. And we're seeing here increasing less and less focus on degrees. I don't think that a bachelor's degree should be required for a sales role anymore. I don't think it's necessary. We're seeing boot camps. You're seeing all kinds of ways that you can actually learn. I mean, the things you can learn on YouTube alone are off the charts, right? So if someone has the determination, drive, discipline, curiosity, and can go get some of these certifications, I think that's fantastic. And I think we'll see less and less focus on degrees, more focus on short-term certifications and boot camps, and skill-based hiring in the future, not just looking for someone who's been in SaaS for 10 years, because then you know what you're going to get.
Yeah, yeah. And one thing and the first time we met and then we had follow-up conversations, I think one thing that has stayed with me is that you've had very different experiences, not just in sales, but overall. You've done investing, you've mentored startups, you've done sales, you've done the SDR job, you've led the team as CRO, you're doing the innovation leader role today. So overall, I think, and you've been doing well in all of these roles. So help us understand more about your journey. If you've had how certain mentors have shaped you, how you have enabled yourself to get to the stage where you are today, and hence that can be learning for many
Yeah.
listeners and most of the people who would watch this later.
Yes. So I have done a lot of things, and they have been different. And I'm not even sure if you know this, because we're still getting to know each other more deeply, but my first career was as a professional musician. And I was a classical musician and an oboist, and I played in the Mexico City Philharmonic and Guadalajara Symphony in Mexico for my first job out of college. Then I got my PhD in musicology and music history, and I taught in college, and I played in some orchestras in Boston. And then I met some people from Forrester, and I wanted to do something bigger, and the internet was just coming alive in the business setting, and Forrester was helping businesses understand how the internet was going to change interactions with consumers, business partners, trading partners, and so on. The biggest thing I can tell the folks who are here and anyone who's listening is always be curious. I have a tense curiosity. I want to learn more. I'm constantly learning, and I never stop learning. And if you want to see big upside in your career, don't be afraid to take a calculated risk. And so the biggest impact that I've had in my career trajectory has been when I've made a pretty significant jump from one company to another, or one type of career to another. And it was a thoughtful jump. It wasn't sort of, arbitrary, but I took a risk. And that's what I would encourage your listeners, your audience. Don't be afraid to take a risk and do something different. And even if it fails, you're going to learn something from it, and that's going to contribute to who you are as a person in the end. So I'm not afraid to take risks.
I have a very interesting question. Somebody just sent it on chat. So you mentioned of calculated risk. So how do you what's your mental model to think about these calculated risks, because all of the things that you have done are very, very different?
Yeah.
So
So
are you somebody who would zoom in 20 years from now, 30 years from now, and say, hey, these are the gaps, this is what I need to fill, and hence let me just take different paths?
wow, that's a really tough question. You know, I, I am. I think I'm an INTP, if you follow the Myers-Briggs. And so in the end, I am kind of driven by a little bit of instinct and gut level, and I have a sense of people and trends that's just sort of intrinsic. But at the same time, I use data. So I use data as a really good starting point. So I do a lot of research, and I look at data, and then I combine that with my instinct and where I want to go personally and professionally in the next 5-year chunk. And that's how I think about some of these decisions. And, when I left the world as a classical musician, it was a difficult decision because I had played music since I was 12 years old at an elite level. And I just felt that I had accomplished everything that I could accomplish with the given talent that I had for that particular role. And instead of hanging on, I let it go. So having some courage, I think, to forge out a new path if that's what's right for you personally and professionally.
Interesting. And one question that comes to my mind is, but let me take the questions from the audience first. So one of the questions is, what according to you are the key differentiators between the boomer way of doing sales to millennial way of doing sales?
Well, that question is going to get me into a lot of trouble, because every time I write about it, people tell me I shouldn't really categorize people, right? So, and I know no one likes to be categorized and generalized, but I am a marketer, and sometimes it does help to do that, so that we can educate the market. I do think it is different because I'm technically a boomer, and for your audience, I just slipped in. I was like the last one they let in. But I have more in common with a millennial in terms of my lifestyle and how my interactions and usage of technology. So I call myself a boomer reboot. So look, I mean, I hate to make these kinds of generalizations. I think the boomers who understand the moment that we're in, the fact that it's transformational, and the fact that traditional ways of selling, hiring, and doing business are not going to get you there in the future. They maybe got you here. Those folks are going to be incredibly successful. So I think, on the millennial side, those folks tend to be very comfortable with the digital transformation, the engaging on social, the utilization of synchronous and asynchronous video and things of that nature. And where you see some skill gaps on that side, or on the Z side, is they don't know how to read the room, or they don't just have quite the art of the deal, right? Sales is an art and a science, right? Even though I'm leaning into the science a lot right now, there is an art of it. So you need to understand when to lean in and lean out, when to push your customer and to back off. And Smarth, if you're selling and you don't have an uncomfortable moment, you're probably not really selling, because you're not really asking that hard question. So I think having the ability to ask a tough question, and we see this with some of the folks who are early in their sales career, where, maybe they never actually asked someone for a date in person, and it was all done by text or app or whatever. But the moment, if I were to ask you out on a date, and the moment before you say yes or no is like, butterflies, and then I get my answer, well, that contributes to sort of the strength to be able to ask that tough sales question. So I don't want to generalize exactly by demographics, but those are some of the different challenges I see for folks at different stages of their sales career.
There are two very interesting things. So one, and both coming from your answer. One, so I was reading a research that said, so a lot of sales reps were interviewed and they were asked a series of questions, and these are across geographies. One conclusion that was made is countries that had more dating culture, the sales reps were better.
Oh, I totally believe that. I totally believe that. That's really interesting. I hadn't heard that, but it makes all the sense in the world.
So that was one. And the second one was when people start their career. And this is when I was also trying to get started with sales, because I come from management consulting background. I have never done B2B sales. B2B was too far. Sales was too far from what typically I would have imagined for myself. But as a founder, you have to do it. So when I started, I was reading an article and it said sales reps, while sales is art and science, first they have to learn the art and later comes the science. Because once you have to understand exactly how you said, when to lean forward, backward, when to push, when not to push, this is more art. And later on, you have to understand how do you optimize your art, which is through science, research, data, and all of those things.
Yeah, I like that. And I agree with that.
It was very interesting conversation with you, and most of the questions that were asked by the audience were very interesting ones as well. One last question that we have for you, and we're mindful of the time. Throughout your career and all the years that you spent in SaaS, B2B, mentoring a lot of founders, interacting with them, what is your one piece of advice for them, for the people who are thinking to build their GTM motions, build their B2B SaaS, build sales-led organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same thing with an entrepreneur, right? You have to be incredibly driven. You have to be incredibly disciplined. You have to have great people around you. And you can't allow yourself to be halted by setbacks and failures. So the people who are successful always find a way, to overcome challenging markets, challenging economies, challenging competitive dynamics, and you just don't take no for an answer.
Yeah. That's very true. I think entrepreneurial journey is rewarding in many ways, but it does teach you this attitude that, hey, whatever the situation is, we'll figure it out, and that's
I
very
agree.
common saying.
Yeah,
Uh,
I
but
agree.
but loved having this conversation with you. Thank you so much for spending your time with us, and I'm sure that all the listeners out there who attend chat today and who would also hear in the future would love the insights that you shared with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you everyone for tuning in the webinar and spending your time. Thank you so much.